Okay, hello and welcome to week 10 of Thinking Sociologically. This week we're going to talk about deviance and social control. This is a really interesting topic for us to talk about right now when we're trying to figure out how to do things like get people to wear masks or get people to social distance. Um, a lot of these theories of deviance and social control would suggest that having the world leader lead the way in terms of things like masking and social distancing is one way to do it, and we'll talk about why. So let's jump in and get into it. Um, Deviance is the most interesting of all of the concepts that I will introduce to you over the course of the semester, simply by function of its lack of clear structured definition. And the reason that deviance can't really have a clear structured definition is because it varies by time and place. It's very much socially, it's about social context as opposed to the behavior itself. Well, why would I say that? Well, it's because not everybody understands the same behaviors to be deviant or not. If you have some sort of physical or psychological ailment in Pennsylvania and you are a holder of a medical marijuana card, then you can purchase and smoke marijuana and ingest in other ways perfectly legally and non deviantly. But even though you're doing it legally, some people may still view that behavior as deviant, as amoral, as illegal, even though it's not, sort of in the way that they think about it. So that's one example of how context changes, right? We've talked in the past about the hazing that the swim team underwent last year and therefore had some sanctions put on them by the NCAA. The NCAA views hazing as deviant. And goes against the policy. So it's also codified, but it wasn't viewed as deviant by the people who engaged in it at the time. Otherwise, they wouldn't have engaged in it. So, what is deviant and when and why something is deviant is very much dependent on not just what the behavior is, but where it's being done, when it's being done, who is witnessing that particular behavior in order to say that that thing is deviant. Okay, let's talk about how some of the theoretical perspectives view deviance. And first, we're going to talk about symbolic interaction because there are a number of deviance theories that come from that tradition of thinking. And they're broken into two factions. So, who do you know, and how do people see you? In the who do you know set of theories, we're talking about differential association theory and opportunity theory. Differential association theory is the theory that your likelihood of engaging in deviant or illegal behavior is based on who you know. It's based on the networks and group memberships that you already have and their connections to others, which may lead you down the path of deviant behavior, quote unquote. Opportunity theory is connected to that, but it's about the structural existence of the mechanisms to engage in deviant behavior. So if you've ever watched The Wire, and if you hadn't, I would suggest it. It's a show on HBO about the drug scene in Baltimore in the late 90s, early 2000s. And in that show, you see these young kids, 11, 12, 13, getting involved in the drug trade as corner boys very early on, right? And almost inevitably. That's because the system of selling drugs and of inserting them into the existing structure so that they can make money selling drugs, even if it's not the direct process of selling the drug, is based on the existence of those structures. So if Avon, Bell, and Stringer Bell hadn't set up this elaborate drug trade in their neighborhood, they would be much less likely to engage in the drug trade themselves. So that's opportunity theory and differential association theory. Okay, let's talk about how do people see you? So those are the other two symbolic interactionist theories that we're going to talk about today. So the first one is stigma. Do you have a socially devalued identity? We sort of talked about this a little bit in the sex and gender and race sections, right? And even in the class section. But being Black, that is a socially devalued identity. There are lots of negative social and personality characteristics that are mapped onto a person who is identified as Black, as ascribed the racial identity of Black, that has a lot of stigma in it. You know, the idea of somebody crossing the street because you are a Black person and you're walking up on them and it's nighttime and they're afraid. That is Goffman's theory of stigma, essentially. And if you have a stigmatized identity, then you are likely to engage in deviance by very virtue of inhabiting that identity. So, for example, because Black women are stereotyped as loud, aggressive, and angry, anytime I try to establish myself as unhappy or have some discontent, immediately people start to worry that I'm going to get loud or I'm going to make a scene. And they shut down those conversations in ways that they wouldn't if I didn't have a stigmatized race and gender based identity, just as an example. Okay, the other theory in How Do People See Us is labeling theory. This comes from Howard Becker. And the idea of labeling theory is that if you call someone deviant, in whichever way you're defining deviant in that particular social context, over and over and over and over again, that person will eventually internalize that deviance and act accordingly. There's a reading that is in week 10 folder. It's just recommended. You don't have to read it, but it's really interesting and it lays this idea out. And it's called The Saints and the Roughnecks. And it's an ethnography of upper class and working class boys in the same industrial town, um, both engaging in deviant behaviors, although different kinds of deviance. One always labeled the saints because they were upper class and seen as their behavior not seen as deviant, and then the roughnecks, the working class kids who are engaging in those same behaviors but are being labeled differently and sort of come to embody that deviant role. I would check it out to sort of get a sense of these theories. Okay, conflict theory asks who's in control, where the laws and the norms reflect the interests of the elite. So they're the ones who are defining deviance. They're the ones who get to decide what behaviors we engage in or not. It's not a reflection of our context, it's a reflection of their social context. And then lastly, we're going to talk about Merton's structural strain theory. So this theory is born from the idea that if there is an imbalance in the cultural goals that we set forth for people and the means that we give them to achieve those goals, deviance will ensue. If you've never seen the show Weeds, a Showtime show, you should watch it. It's about a white upper class woman whose husband suddenly dies and she starts to sell marijuana as a result. And it's a very good example of structural strain theory. It's innovation. So this is a breakdown of the structural strain theory by mode and method. Most deviance happens in the innovation stage where you want to achieve the goals. She wanted to live this upper class life, but she didn't have the means to. So she had to do something deviant like sell drugs. Conformity is there's no deviance because you have the goals and you're going to use the non-deviant means. Ritualism, you don't care about the goals, but you're still going to engage in non deviant behavior because you've been well socialized. And then retreatism, you don't care about the goals, you don't care about the means, you're sort of opting out of all of this. There's also rebellion. We try not to talk about them because they want to destroy society, and that's not something that we want. Okay. Um, Lastly, active learning exercise for today. I want you to think through some behaviors that you engage in that you don't see as deviant, but that other people might. And if you are brave enough to tell us about them, we'll talk about it in discussion this week. All right, I'll see you then. Bye bye.